platforms, from my point of view, is the critical logic of how we need to think about government services delivery now. So can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. Cloudy is as cloudy does. Takes two to tango. Platform plus agile. This is a term that was used in a report in the UK a few years ago. So new shared cloud services platforms, new dancing skills required in order to do this. And I've used that word shared for quite a while in this context. And actually, it's starting to dawn on me, actually, that these things are not shared. So one of the problems of the old approaches that we had around shared services was the idea that they were shared services. So therefore, we could all have a say in how it worked, what it did, etc. Because it was shared, right? We kind of collectively own it. These new cloud services are actually not shared services at all. They're actually centralized services in the sense that the individual customers have little choice but to consume the service and to become intelligent consumers of a centralized service. And this was, Alistair actually talked about this yesterday as well, in terms of how they think about prioritising new service requests. So that's excellent. Wonderful, Steve. So am I just the snake oil kind of salesman? Is this just the universal panacea for government IT kind of thing? And no, of course it's not. So the latest report is this idea of fit. How do you know as an agency that a cloud service is a good fit to what you want to do and to your organisational circumstances? Because clearly there is no universal message that says that cloud services, any form of IT sourcing, is the one-size-fits-all thing. So what we need now is frameworks which help us puzzle over this idea of fit. So it's usually debatable and often hotly debated. And I've noticed that in New Zealand the debate is warming up more positively in the last year or so, which is a good thing. But we should be debating this, right? Because it's not snake oil. It's not something that we want to find ourselves regretting in 5 years' time. And we should be having a robust debate around the arguments for, and we could get Toad of Toad Hall out, you know, to do the evangelical stuff about why this is all goodness. Latest functionality, flexible, you know, blah, blah. And we can also admire the fact that we could introduce Eeyore or Chicken Little into the discussion and talk about the fact that actually there are some arguments against this model in terms of trustworthiness and maturity of the counterparties, loss of control, CapEx versus OpEx, integration, rogue adoption, islands of information, etc. So when we have that debate as a purely theoretical exercise, then it's very enjoyable over a glass of red wine and such like. Well, to make it have value, though, in the context of government strategy and in the context of thinking about an individual agency's needs, then it needs to be put into the context of three things. Business needs, and most particularly the way that business needs align to the benefits and features of the cloud services model. Secondly, the constraints in the IT status quo. So to what degree are your existing options not happy? And cloud services enablers. So is there a headwind or a following wind for this conversation, discussion, debate in your agency, in your part of the world? So just to put some bit of flesh around that, and just coming to the end. So what are the characteristics or factors of business need that would align well to the cloud services model? So urgency, it's just got to do it quickly. Banality, which I mean, is it a relatively straightforward thing? Not necessarily the kind of thing that's going to get you on the front page of the paper tomorrow. Is demand volatile, known to be volatile or uncertain? Is functionality changing or volatile? Is there some inflection point? You know, are you at a point of saying, well, something's changed, new leader, contracts come to an end, major cock-up, never let a good crisis go to waste? Is what you do generalizable, in that if you solve it once, you can probably reuse it many times? Is it probably going to be used outside the organisation, on a mobile, outside the firewall, outside the agency office? So you can see if these things are all low, then you're dealing with some business need that probably is not the right place to be starting thinking about cloud services. It's not urgent, it's sensitive, demand is known, functionality is known, there's no particular catalyst or inflection point. It's only specific to your agency, it's only used inside the firewall, and it's not used on mobile devices. And if they're high, then it feels quite different. Constraints in the status quo, executive budget pressure, pace pressure, executive frustration, infrastructure stress, people or skill shortages, security vulnerabilities. If those things are all low, then you're kind of in a pretty happy place and you don't really need to think creatively about other options. But if those things are high, then you actually need to be thinking pretty seriously about other options. And then we come to these cloud services enablers, which are factors which create a headwind or a tailwind for this whole discussion. And even if the other factors, for example, are high, if the headwind is too strong, then it becomes a risky thing for people to do. And also, it's not likely to necessarily go quickly or successfully. So enablers are things like an outcomes focus. So are you in an agency where the focus is on getting stuff done? And that's a very important thing, as opposed to the focus is on process compliance, being safe. Never get sacked for going through the process, even if you don't achieve a damn thing. Policy support, so this kind of cloud-first stuff. Compliance, latitude and clarity. Is it safe to host data offshore or not? What kind of data? And under what circumstances? So clarity around these rules are important. Proof of point visibility. Can you see examples where this has been done? And are they celebrated as success stories and visible to people? Do you have hands-on experience of doing small things? One of the things you see is that agencies that have done this well, it's typically not their first go at it. They have had small experiments over time and have built skills. They've taken a compounding organisational learning approach. Data classification, right? Can data be offshore? Well, that's a pretty hard question to ask if you don't even know what data you have or how it's classified. Procurement support, the rules around procurement. TCO awareness, how do you think about the cost of IT? TCO awareness becomes quite important because many agencies actually don't have a good understanding of the cost of their IT, and therefore external outsourcing approaches like cloud services can seem expensive because they come fully loaded with their TCO. The sustainable total cost of operations is something that cloud service providers must do because otherwise they go bankrupt. Whereas normally in government we have kind of sweating the assets kind of approach, budget cuts, etc. So the TCO is perceived as low, but it's not a sustainable approach. And then finance support around CapEx and OpEx. So business needs are all around fit to business needs makes the game worth the candle. So this is worth a go if there is a good fit to business needs. An understanding of constraints in the status quo make it easier to see the value of the cloud services approach and to argue the case for it. And enablers create and sustain momentum for cloud services adoption. They create a tailwind and make the headwind go away a bit. So there's a framework in the report which high, medium, low provides a self-assessment kind of scoring thing for a particular business use case scenario. And you may find that useful as a way of puzzling over how to argue the case for this kind of thing with executives in your organisation, and to puzzle over where would you start. Like, if you take an compounding organisational learning approach, you don't want to inadvertently have bad organisational learning experiences where actually you do something which turns out to be the disaster that everyone learns from. So what you want to do is to find those good, safe places to start and to focus your energies there in order to build skills and capability over time. And then you can see how the business needs fit, how the constraints fit, how the enablers fit, and what an overall score might be. And this is a worked example of Disability S.a.A.'s Salesforce project in South Australia, where the business needs were a good fit. The constraints were a pretty good fit because they had material problems in their IT organisation. There were some enablers because the Office of the CIO had done some good work around getting cabinet approval for certain rules and such like. So in closing, the quickening of technology change requires a compounding organisational learning approach, in my view. Find things that work and do more of them, learn what doesn't work and stop doing it. Case studies show that cloud services can provide a useful thing in this discussion, better, faster, less costly. There are three big ideas that I think are material in this whole discussion. Can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. Go back to learn what doesn't work and stop doing it. Cloudy is as cloudy does. So go back to find things that work and do more of them. And it takes two to tango, which is a recognition that actually getting this to work means changing the way that you think about going about IT. It's not a universal panacea, so we need to think about fit and how this model fits. And the Cloud Fit framework provides a way of thinking about that. So when business needs align, when constraints are material and enablers are present, then it can be a good fit. Cloud services plus agile thinking equals innovation and thus productivity, QED. So final thought by way of homework for you to do in the weekend. So what if every dollar we spent on an IT solution contributed incrementally to the growth of a service that could be shared and reused by other agencies? You can write an essay on that for discussion and bring it back to class next week. That would be good. Because this is the essence of what's going on with this whole thing now. So if you spend $1 on an IT solution in the cloud services model with an enterprise-grade cloud services provider, what you're doing is strengthening that business through your demand and your expenditure so that they can become more robust, more onshore, more secure, more functional. And as they do, that same service will be more powerfully available to other agencies and will be used by other agencies and will become a shared service. In fact, a centralised service that is used in a pure commercial model by multiple agencies to do useful government stuff. And as we put more money into that model, we will get more services which are more specific to government needs, more secure, more onshore, more trustworthy. And what I find interesting coming back to New Zealand this trip is that the government has put a fair amount of strategic commitment into exactly this approach. And what it's now doing is putting government demand on the table to stimulate the growth of cloud services businesses which are in New Zealand. And if we continue to support them through agency demand, they will become the export-earning software companies of the future, exporting innovative government services to other parts of the region, including Australia. So this is kind of important from both productivity arguments and from industry development perspectives. I'm happy to discuss, take questions and such for a little while. We have
looking forward to seeing dancing as a competency in our personal appraisals next year. So we do have time for a few questions. Who'd like that?
I'd just like to ask, what relationship do you see between sort of large amounts of money being injected into the public sector IT? Because I tend to think there's a strong relationship between overfunding
yes,
and
I agree.
And problems.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And that's one of the reasons, for example, why the federal government in Australia has been a very slow adopter of cloud services, because they have too much money. Necessity is the mother of invention, you know, proverbially, and it's actually true. So when you have money, you're inclined to want to be independent and to act unilaterally, which is the opposite of what we need to be doing. So I agree with that. Hi.
Some of what you're talking about is turning over what we looked at yesterday, like the customs guys were talking about, measure, plan, do.
Yes.
And I sort of picking from what you're what you're outlining, there's an element of do, learn from that, mitigate, and do some more. So you're sort of turning that circle, if you like, into a more active approach than thinking. Would that be fair?
Well, there's no real argument for just do whatever the hell you feel like. And there was a good discussion yesterday from someone whose name I can't remember, I'm sorry, from Internal Affairs, who talked about a vision without action is a daydream, and action without vision is a nightmare. So there's this, certain amount of need to plan, but in a different way. And actually, it's mostly about focusing on outcomes and pursuing outcomes through more iterative approaches of learning activities. But in the way that is often commented around Agile, Agile is not just an excuse not to have a project plan. Like there's a process and a discipline that goes with, and that process itself is part of the learning, because it's not something that can be just invented instantaneously. There's a lot of unlearning in order to learn new things.
Steve, my question is, with this change, we've gone from traditional type computing, with management has been able to just keep feeding the boilers, keep on doing things the same way, and we've seen some examples of where we've just scaled so huge it just falls over, like the National Health Service. I think they spent £13 billion.
Yes.
Just closed that. I also noticed they've closed their innovation lab as well, which is interesting. My question is, could you talk a little bit about the change in management from operationally just doing the same and the skills that you need to lead an innovative team, to actually take those risks and lead that? Because I think that's probably a big change that needs to happen amongst our leadership.
It is. And it's always kind of axiomatic that often we're having this discussion in the wrong room, because the people that need to understand this are the next or current generation of business executives, the secretaries, chief executives, deputy secretaries, and their direct reports. Because in the main, they're the people who set the authorising environment within which IT projects are done. And they're often the worst offenders in terms of the red flag in front of the car to slow it down. Because, and to some degree you can't blame them, right? Because we have educated them over the last decade that IT projects are extremely career risky things. They're dangerous, they're high cost, they'll probably run over, they'll probably have all sorts of politics and nastiness. So why the hell would you want to touch one with a barge pole? So you can't blame them for thinking that way. Somehow or other, though, we've got to re-educate them and give them confidence again about the fact that it's possible to use ICT to drive innovation in policy and service delivery in reasonably quick, reasonably low cost, reasonably safe ways. And they're intelligent, rational people, so they're just responding to what they have learned and over time. They've learned that this is dangerous. We need to teach them that it's safe and can be done. Now, when you look at the case studies of early adopters, leadership is always, one of the biggest drivers. And it's a leader who was prepared to be outcomes focused and prepared to do things that were a bit adventurous, had the confidence to do that. And how do they get that confidence? Well, they only get that confidence by learning what has worked and having small glimpses of the future and having that little bit of confidence to take the next step in that way. It's a two-edged thing. It's just about conversation. So we've got to talk to business executives about these things.
Sort of a follow-up question then. I've been playing around with the adaptive cycle, so the ecology cycle, and one of the ideas you start off with a growth and a little bit of a height curve, but in ecology, in the adaptive cycle, the curve is actually, some people refer to that as memory, and I come from the Ministry of Education, and I looked at the Queensland Health Report, and I looked at our Novapay Health Report, and there were the same messages. And I'm struck by the fact that you've got that tight memory. We keep on doing things the same way.
That's right. And
then often we get to the top of the hill and we become completely off course, disengaged with reality.
Yeah.
So I suppose that's a little bit, to rephrase, are you saying that we actually need to change the people that are actually in these leadership roles because their memory can't be changed, or we need to, it's like a re-education?
Yeah, re-education, I think. It's just organisational learning. We've got to learn new behaviours. And the problem in all of this, like I'm not underestimating the complexity and difficulty of all of this, right? I'm simply saying, and when I drew that snakes and ladders picture, like I'm serious about the fact that we're all smart people. We've been through university, we work hard, we care about this stuff, and yet this is what happens. So we've just got to stop continuing to do that stuff. Now that's not easy because we're not allowed to, etc. We don't have the right platforms, you know, we've got to. So, but all I'm saying is find places to get started. Use CloudFit type analysis to find good, safe, prudent places to start, demonstrate success, and then have a conversation with your business executives about that success and how that creates different possibilities for the future, for the next project, so that we can compound that little bit of learning and take it and stand up on it and go to the next conversation for the next more serious business application. And so we heard from Naomi yesterday about, you know, reforming the tax system. Like, no one's, you know, kidding ourselves if we think that reforming the tax system is some simple little agile project. But we're also kidding ourselves if we think, and she said it, that it can be done in a traditional, let's do a 3-year project plan to reform the tax system. You know, that's not the way it's going to work. It's going to work by finding things that work and learning from that. Because over that 3 years, the art of the technology possible is going to fundamentally change. And the things that citizens are using are going to change, etc. All of that.
You mentioned that audit can often be seen as a real negative impact on the stuff. I'm just interested in your views on how you think audit and governance, for that matter, might need to change in this sort of brave new environment that you're talking about.
Yeah, and like Tim made some very good comments yesterday about assurance and the fact that the problem usually is the fact that we create entities in government that have no accountability for outcomes. They have no commitment to the government's outcomes or to achieving any damn thing apart from being responsible for the narrow view of life that they have. So, and that's the way audit agencies often operate. So they will produce reports which materially damage confidence and organisational learning and capacity to do things because they make people more risk averse and more unlikely to try something innovative. And they have no accountability for the innovation agenda because their accountability is looking in the rear vision mirror at risk. And this is a problem, right? So I was quite encouraged by what Tim said yesterday about the assurance framework that's being developed. Explicitly has the idea of balancing outcomes with risks. The aim is to drive innovation and to achieve the government's objectives. We need to be prudent about the way we manage risks in doing that, but that's different to focusing on risks alone, which is what usually happens.
I've got a question, I guess, about a thing called double loop learning and whether you've ever come across that. It sounds very similar to some of the concepts I think that you're talking about. I know we had a project recently where you do the Agile kind of approach and you learn in the first pass. And one of the things that you learn is what you learn you don't always do.
Sure.
And so we had to make sure that we built this double loop learning into our process. So every time we learned a set of lessons, we then went back the next time that we passed through them. And we looked at ourselves, I guess, as people, and we kind of said, right, well, we learned that we shouldn't be doing these things, but yet we did them again.
Yes. Sure.
Why? And you dig deeper into why you're doing the things that you know you shouldn't do. I think it's a really powerful and important process to get past that first. Yeah, we know what the right thing to do is, but we're just going to do something else anyway.
Yeah. No, I agree. And that's why I think of it like intuitively, this is all really hard stuff, and we are a lot of the problem because we've learned how to do things in the old way. We just need to go through cycles of grappling with that.
I'd just like to step in at this stage as well. I'm John Russell Hodge. It's been 1 year since my last conference. And I was actually an overpaid project manager, so I'm taking advantage of the fact this is a very select group who won't say things outside these four walls. But we actually took advantage of the Queensland payroll situation. And the program director and myself, as project manager, put together a paper which contrasted overpay with Queensland Health. And 3 weeks later, I had to take the post-it notes and stuff that came out of the session that we had with Mark Toomey, who some of you may know, but one of the world's leading experts on governance, who we paid to come and talk to the project board and the project team. And about 3 weeks later, I took the post-it notes down from the kitchen in the project area simply because I was so embarrassed that no action had come out of that session. So the idea of actually doing it from below and up is really problematic, and it is a situation where it's a thing, it's like you don't sweep the stairs with the bottom step. That's my view.
Yes, in big projects that's true. And I think the other thing that Alistair said yesterday, which really resonated with me, was how we motivate people to want to do this type of work. And big projects are the last thing that anybody wants to have anything to do with, that wants to do innovative work in this space. So somehow or other, it's our responsibility to try and stop that whole logic of big, high-risk, long-term projects and try and turn it into cycles of smaller projects which give everyone the opportunity to learn and develop and achieve as a way of doing things. That can be bottom-up, but I agree it's not, not simple when you're dealing with big things that need to be done. I'm running over time, so...
Got time for one last question, if there is one.
This really isn't a question, it's just to reaffirm, I guess, your approach. We're from Statistics New Zealand. We've had a small team doing iterative development in that way, and it's been really successful. We started off very small, and now we have about $1.5 million each year is being invested into a reusable platform. So it can work. It is really challenging, but I found the talk from Alistair yesterday really, it was, really, really encouraging. Yeah. So it can be done.
Yes, it can. Well, we have to.
Thank you again, Steve. Truly insightful presentation. And where would you like the assignments sent to?
Yes, my email address is on there, so I'll expect those assignments by 8 a.m. on Monday morning on my desk.
Would you please join me in thanking Steve for his presentation?
Thank you.